Russian-Armenian University. His topic will be 3 levels of the small states integration, the experience of Armenia. Dr. Norayr, the floor is yours, you have 10 minutes.
Thank you very much. Good morning. The participation of small states in various integration associations has already shown their effectiveness on numerous examples. European Union, ASEAN, ECOWAS, and etc. At the same time, most researchers agree that regional integration is beneficial, first of all, for small states. This issue again remains debatable, since political and economic dividends may have different meanings for specific countries of the same integration union. Political influence in some cases requires high economic costs, which has been repeatedly demonstrated in the process of formation of the European Union and Eurasian Union. It's worth paying attention to some systems of view on international relations, which most fully demonstrates the essence of modern processes. This report is an attempt to analyze integration processes from perspective of the critical realism. Critical realism is a philosophical theory that was projected on international relations, and which in a broad sense postulates the absence of connection between understanding about international relations and the real picture of it. Such a neo-Kantian approach reduces to the search of a missing link, the lack of which leads to a distortion of the motives and conditions for foreign policy of the small states. In answering this question, we should stress on several aspects. The correlation between integration and, I think, almost forgotten concept of globalization. The combination of the world political space universalization processes and the regionalization of economic relations, because we now speak about different regions, Baltic states, Central Asia, South Caucasus, thinking that there is any inner logic in regional interaction between these states, but not about global and more higher level. And the diffusion of various spheres of human life is also one of these aspects, and the connection of domestic and foreign policy. An analysis of all these elements allows us to talk about several goals or levels of integration processes. First of all, it is a stabilization of political and economic relations within states with access to the regional level of cooperation in all areas. Stabilization is understood as balancing of different spheres, political, social, cultural, in domestic policy, which gives us opportunity to move to higher level. Within second level is convergence of positions within integration associations. It's the main problem for Eurasian Union when we haven't got any similar position between Kazakhstan, Armenia, Kyrgyzstan, and different other Belarus and different other countries. And third level is usage of integration projects for inclusion in the global system, competition and cooperation. So I think that integration must be considered not as the main goal, but as instrumentation for build a more powerful economic, more inclusive policy to enter the global world. And the missing link in this context should be found at the point of conjunction of political systems, integration, and the ability of political elites to formulate both local and global requests. If we will consider one of these elements separately of one of each other, it can lead us to degradation of institutional systems that are not adapted to quickly respond to environmental challenges. Example of Armenia is very interesting from perspective of inner domestic and problems in domestic and foreign policy. I want to mention several aspects. One of them is a perception, social perception of integration, because in our society, main part of our society, it identifies the Eurasian integration process with alliance with Russia. They think that it is it's a similar process. If we will speak about government also, Eurasian integration is understood as one part or one element of our economic politics, and there is no essential knowing about this process. Also, I want to say that different other and leading country of this union, Eurasian Union, Russia, tries to build new values, new concepts connecting with, for example, history, with memory, and etc. And the one aspect also, last year the war and all other processes showed us that Armenia's position, geopolitical position, moved from South Caucasus, from post-Soviet space, or it's just the process of moving, began from South Caucasus to Middle East, or Greater Middle East. And so we have a lot of missing links in this case. And increasing role of Sunni region in south of Armenia show us that it is border not only between Armenia and Iran, but also between Eurasian Union, Economic Union, and Iran, which is part of a free trade zone. And that's why in 3 levels or 4 levels, beginning from bilateral issues and move to global level, decision makers must understood whole processes in more essential way. Thank you. I think.
Thank you, Dr. Norayr, for keeping the deadlines. So the next speaker will be Nora Gevorgyan, virtually Associate Professor at the Department of World Politics and International Relations of Russian Armenian University, surviving as small states between global powers, Armenia on the crossroads of the EU and the EAEU. Dr. Nora, the floor is yours. Please keep deadline 10 minutes. I will inform you prior to 3 minutes and then 1 minute, please.
Thank you very much. But before starting, I would like to thank all the organizers of this conference and my alma mater and all the volunteers for the immense work. And also ask the moderator to have some mercy, please. So, I will start with my speech. Despite the fact that all states share the concept of sovereignty and autonomy, there are certain features that influence how small states operate in the international system and build their foreign policy priorities, obviously. With a limited set of human and material resources to engage larger powers while vulnerable to asymmetrical power relations, small states need to adopt particular strategies to ensure their survival, such as balancing and complementing. Apparently, the process of setting foreign and security policy priorities for small states becomes a vital aspect of their approach to security than for greater states. In contrast to larger states, small states operate within narrow margins, as any ill-considered policy or reckless move may have serious consequences for their nation's existence. So in my research, I addressed the following question: how small states shape and conduct their foreign policy while caught between conflicting interests of global powers in a regional context, using Armenia as a case study. So the study examines whether a small landlocked state like Armenia, when faced with the quandary of European and Eurasian international paths, has the maneuvering space to pursue a multi-vector foreign policy, given its own geopolitical and hard security challenges. By assessing the evolution of the interplay between Armenia and the European and Eurasian economic unions and discussing the nature of commitments and depth of Armenia's participation in the EA, EU, and the EU's bilateral agreements and neighborhood programs, my study investigates the extent to which Armenia's membership in the Eurasian Economic Union affects its Euro integration policy, providing possible explanations of Armenia's interest vis-à-vis the EU, and the main motives for this subsequent change of its integration model. Additionally, the study reflects on the prospects of Armenia's Europeanization in the aftermath of the 2020 Nagorno-Karabakh war, taking into account the changed geopolitical reality and the post-war diplomatic dynamics in the South Caucasus. So, for much of its history, Armenia has been trapped in its intricate geopolitical location, situated at the unrewarding crossroads of clashing interests of different empires, civilizations, and religions. Over time, the country lost its foreign policy clout in the competition with larger powers. At the early stages of Armenia's independence after the collapse of the Soviet Union, due to difficulties in state building, severe socio-economic conditions, the shortage of energy resources, the burden of the unresolved Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, and close borders with Azerbaijan and Turkey, resulting in the country's near total isolation, the country has adopted Russia-oriented foreign and security policies, as evidenced by bilateral security and economic agreements between the two states. Nevertheless, owing to its Indo-European origin, as well as due to various political, geopolitical, economic, and security reasons, Armenia has always been interested in integration into European structures. So, since gaining independence by choosing a European model of development, Armenia has been actively engaged in the EU's bilateral, multilateral, and regional initiatives and projects and platforms, and it's deepening its relationships with the EU. So in the early 90s, Armenia was involved in TASIS, the EU Humanitarian Office, the Food and Nutrition Programs, which provided EU technical assistance and humanitarian support to regional states governments in the process of transition to market economies and democratic societies. The further development of relations between the EU and Armenia was through signing the PCA's Partnership and Cooperation Agreements in 1996, but aside from providing a legal background of bilateral relations and establishing political dialogue, this 10-year partnership agreement was meant to provide a wide scope of extensive cooperation. However, given the lack of incentive, political will, and eagerness on both sides, the PCA was not successful, and overall the EU-Armenia relation remained very passive. The dawn of the 21st century marked a new stage in the EU's policy in the region, with profound acknowledgement of its strategic interest and emphasized willingness of a more active engagement and development of a comprehensive strategy towards the South Caucasus. During this period, the EU's policy vis-à-vis the region significantly evolved from a uniform approach to clearly differentiated policies. So the EU's relations towards the South Caucasus were institutionalized through ENP, Eastern Partnership, Association Agreement, and DCFTA, and upon attempts at bringing the partner countries closer to the EU's normative and regulatory framework. Nonetheless, weakened by flaws in its structure, scope and nature, the ENP failed to offer tangible incentives for Armenia to foster fundamental reforms. Overall, the ENP, with its vague and remote prospects, didn't clearly define the character of the relations between the EU and its neighbors, and due to the ENP's structural and operational limitations, lacking credibility and leverage, the EU still remained a distant actor. On May 7, 2009, at the Prague summit, the EU launched a new initiative, the Eastern Partnership, for 6 post-Soviet countries, including Armenia, Azerbaijan, Georgia, Moldova, Ukraine, and Belarus, which has been envisaged not only to contribute to the overall strengthening of the EU's offer to partner countries through perspective of the association agreement and the FTA, and also to address the shortcomings of the ENP. And since the very beginning of the program, Armenia has been actively engaged in the EEP's initiatives, making significant progress in the implementation of the reforms and the harmonization of the domestic law in accordance with the EU standards. Cooperation with the EEP was considered by political elites as a chance to improve democratic order and create new economic opportunities. And instead of being a distant external actor, the EU came to be perceived in Armenia as the major partner in the country's modernization, the one to provide guidance for the country's internal reform process and assist in the implementation of the reforms and strengthen economic and overall stability of the country. The EU's offer focused on long-term cooperation on technical issues was all the more attractive for Armenia because Armenia's political elite believed their political survival or the security alliance with Russia would not be threatened. Nevertheless, despite Armenia's progressive integration into EU models and standards and substantive achievements in terms of legal approximation, resulting in the timely conclusion of negotiations for this FTA with the EU, on September 3, 2013, right after Armenian President Sargsyan's visit to Moscow and negotiations with Russian President Vladimir Putin, the Armenian administration announced that it intended to join the Russian-led customs union and subsequently engaged in the formation of the Eurasian Economic Union. So apparently, Sargsyan's U-turn statement came as a surprise for the EU officials and was a significant part of Armenian society and political elites, since bilateral negotiations on the association agreement has just been finalized and the country has been planning to sign the agreement in November. Moreover, back in April 2012, there were numerous statements made by high-level Armenian officials on the impossibility of joining the customs union, given the absence of common land and maritime border with the customs union and lack of economic relations with the participating states. To understand why the country abruptly decided to join the Eurasian Economic Union at the time when it met key EU demands under the FTA and successfully completed the negotiations on the association agreement, several determinants should be explained. But first is the country's heavy dependence on Russia in terms of security provision. Specifically, the unresolved Nagorno-Karabakh conflict and unsettled Armenian-Turkish relations are the issues cited more frequently. And more specifically, Russia's pressure became apparent with military rapprochement with Armenians for Azerbaijan, evidenced by billions of dollars of sophisticated weaponry sales to Azerbaijan from 2010 to 2014. And another factor explaining Armenia's Russia-led choice is the country's energy security concerns, in particular Armenia's heavy reliance on energy supplies from Russia, which made the country especially vulnerable to possible gas price hikes. And interestingly, shortly before Armenia's U-turn in April 2013, Russia played its energy card by increasing gas price by 50% for Armenia, thus indicating the devastating economic consequences for the country's European aspirations. Besides using Armenia's security and energy dependency as a political leverage, Moscow also employed the economic tools to make Armenia reconsider its dialogue with the EU and to prevent the signing of the EU's association agreement. In addition, Russia's large Armenian diaspora community, estimated at around 2.5 million people, and the high number of Armenian labor migrants located there still keep Armenia very dependent on Russia. And hence, keeping in mind the mistreatment of the Georgian population in Russia during the period of very tense Russian-Georgia relations before the 2008 war, the Armenian leadership chose to ensure the serious repercussions of antagonizing Russia. All the above mentioned arguments led to conclude that Armenia's decision to join the customs union was made under political pressure of Russia, which was obviously interested in decreasing European influence in the sphere of its privileged interests and strengthening the shape perspective of the EU's formation by any means. Now, faced with harsh realities of harsh security challenges, the complementary policy of the small landlocked state had to yield through power of Russian cohesion, given there were no security guarantees from the EU to mitigate the political and economic costs of antagonizing Russia. Nonetheless, since joining the Russian Economic Union, Armenia has persistently sought to regain relations with the EU in hopes of preserving key objectives related to enhancing domestic reforms and multi-vector foreign policy. Armenian officials declared that Armenia's membership in the EU will not affect its growing relations with the EU, and intended to combine these two directions of the country's foreign policy, meaning remaining in the EU while complementing that membership with further cooperation with the EU, as well as highlighting the country's role as a bridge between.
Dr. Nora, your time is over, so please, you have 30 minutes to sum up.
Okay, in December 2015, the Armenians officially launched the negotiations, and eventually in November 2017, the CEPA was signed, which is significantly important for both the EU and both for the Armenia. And nevertheless, the question remains to whether, to what extent the conditions and constraints determined by membership in the Russian economy would enable Armenia to comply with the provisions of CEPA and the revised EMP to enhance the partnership with the EU further. Well, out of political, economic and sexual components of the political dialogue section was the less affected by Armenia's EU membership and has kept the substance of the previously negotiation association agreement. Obviously, the economic component of CEPA proved the most affected, and because I don't have time, I will not go to all the treaty articles that limit Armenia's cooperation in frames of CEPA, and so thus, while Armenia's openness to the EU's rules and templates remains high, the outlook for cooperation in many fields is severely constrained by participation in the Eurasian integration project, which requires high degree of harmonization and compliance with its own policy law and regulatory framework. And furthermore, the October 2020 Nagorno-Karabakh war has significantly changed the geopolitical reality in the South Caucasus, and following the EU's passiveness throughout the war with increasing Russian and Turkish political and military involvement in the region, the impact of the EU's policy in the South Caucasus will now be significantly limited. At the same time, given the hard security needs of the country, Moscow gained even greater control of Armenia's domestic and foreign policies. And undoubtedly, this new post-war geopolitical reality in the South Caucasus and the EU's apparent failure to ensure security and stability in the region, as well as its inability to provide the Armenian people solid guarantees on their security and aspirations, will further narrow the prospects of Armenia-EU relations and hinder the small landlocked country's aspirations to achieve a Russian-European balance. And that's it. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Dr. Nora, for giving a very interesting speech. I would like to bring now to the floor Narek Sukiasyan, PhD candidate, Department of Political Science, Yerevan State University. And the topic is a two-filter framework for the study of small states' foreign policy behavior, case of Armenia. Please, Nora, keep the deadlines and please turn on the presentation. Can you turn on the presentation, please?
Thank you. I would like to start with a round of thank you to the organizers and the volunteers here. My presentation is entitled Two-Filter Framework for the Study of Small States Foreign Policy Behavior, Case of Armenia. I will disappoint you if you wanted to learn about Armenia's foreign policy as a small state from this presentation. I think my colleagues, my honorable co-panelists have done a great job in that regard. And especially I would like to thank Dr. Gevorgyan because she set perfectly the scene for what I'm going to talk about. This is primarily a presentation about methods, a study framework, which I think is very useful, especially and very doable when it comes to working with your students in their thesis, in their BA or MA degree thesis. This is, I think, a very delicate, very elegant framework which you can use. So this is first of all a clarification. This is first of all a presentation about method, about the framework. But Armenia's examples will be brought up, not in detail at all, in order to exemplify how this approach can be applied. This is a two-filter approach, and because I try to introduce two filters which are useful to study the foreign policy choices of small states. In the conduct of foreign affairs, Armenia, as predominantly majority of all small states, is foremost restricted by security concerns, which serve as the first filter in its foreign policy formulation. Foreign policy choices of small states have to pass through this filter to check if the policy in question boosts or undermines the security of a small state, and they decide accordingly. Therefore, the filter of security should be the first one in the study of small states' foreign policy. So this counts as the first filter. The second filter is Olaf Knudsen's 6 variables, about which I will speak a bit later. So if we speak about Armenia, I will not go into detail at all, but in case of Armenia, to exemplify what I mean, the security threats very simplistically emanate from Azerbaijan and Turkey. In case of Azerbaijan, it is the conflict in Karabakh, and in case of solidarity, in case of Turkey, it is the solidarity of the country with its ethnic or political kin by imposing a blockade on Armenia, and its regional expansion in recent years, its role in Second Karabakh War, etc. The point I'm trying to illustrate here is that Armenia, as a small state, by making its foreign policy decisions, first of all, has to check those choices through this filter to see if its choices boost or undermine its security. And this is the predominant and the foremost concern. Not even security interest, because small states usually have security concerns rather than interests. So this is the first filter before studying anything about small states. The second filter, where I bring up Olaf Knudsen's 6 variables, which he put forward in 1996 in analyzing small state security, the role of external factors. You can see in the footnote. For the articulation of the second filter, the framework integrates a 6-dimensional model put forward by Knudsen regarding power disparity of small states. Such distinction delineates the extent of agency available to small states and sets an appropriate level of analysis for small states' foreign policy behavior. I will not read them out, but we'll try to speak about them at each of the slides. So the first one is the strategic significance of the small state's geographic location as viewed from one or another of the leading great power. Again, very simply put, here we after distincting the security concerns of the country, here we distinct the great powers, Russia and the nominal West, which includes the US and the EU. And I will not go too much into detail because Dr. Gevorgyan did this in an excellent way. What I want to only highlight here, while Russia regards Armenia with its zone of special interest as part of the post-Soviet space, the West has initially lacked coherent articulation of strategic interest in the region, and later was dominated by US military and economic necessities. I mean here the war on terrorism and hydrocarbon interests, which was followed by European Union's normative pragmatic approach. Russia's interest in the region, among the traditional ones, have been increased after the deployment of peacekeepers in Artsakh, while regional powers seem to be more and more isolated. The West is increasingly being isolated from the region. The next variable that Knudsen proposes is the degree of tension between the leading great powers, and here basic premise is very simple, especially when it comes to Armenia. It is this one, as it follows. The more tense are relations between the West and Russia, the less room of maneuverability is left to Armenia's foreign policy. The better are the relations between Russia and the West, it is easier for Armenia to conduct its foreign policy with less risks. So Armenia is a very easy case here to illustrate. The third variable is the phase of a power cycle in which the nearest leading great power finds itself. In our case, it is Russia, and this variable is very, let's say it's conspirological. It depends very much from case to another. So this variable, the basic premise behind this variable is the following. If a small state becomes independent when the great power or the empire is at its stronger phase, then the independence and autonomy of the small power will tend to be more constrained. Reversely, if the small state declares independence when the empire is collapsing, then it will be more autonomous at that moment. However, the variable has to be tested also in historical perspective, as the great power changes its power cycle, becomes more stronger or weaker. For example, in Armenia's case, again, I'm criminally simplifying here. We're talking about the collapse of the Soviet Union, the roaring 90s, then the consolidation of state around Vladimir Putin, etc. So this also has to be tested, and this is very conspirological, I agree. I'll take that. The fourth variable is the historical record of relations between the small power and the closest great power. Here we can bring in constructivist theories with a particular emphasis on collective perceptions and predominant historical narratives that have shaped the contemporary security identity of Armenia. The traditional and mainstream reading of Russia's historical role for Armenia and the Armenian society has been that of a savior, a protector, with all the consequences that derive from that. The fifth variable of Olaf Knudsen it scrutinizes the policy towards the small state of the rivaling great power. Here we have the nominal West. Small states' foreign policy choices are usually less dependent on what they may desire to have or to be able to do, but more on what greater actors of the system are willing or able to offer it. In Armenia's case, again grossly simplifying, Armenia's policy towards the West has not been constrained only by intrinsic reasons, but also from the half-hearted willingness and ability of the West to offer Armenia viable maneuverability. Last, Olaf Knudsen proposes the last variable. He proposes the existence of multilateral frameworks of security cooperation which might be able to stabilize power disparity. Here we're speaking about the power disparity of the small state and the closest great power, in case Armenia and Russia. Here in this regard, the framework may draw on IR theories, and we here can talk about the institutionalism, liberalism, theories of alliance formation, you name it, you can bring it up, whatever fits best to your research. In this variable, two aspects should be considered, I think. First aspect is how these organizations help to sustain the security of small state, because we're speaking about security organizations. But second, and a bit in a different, more theoretical way of liberalism maybe, is how, if at all, these multilateral frameworks in ideal case cut the asymmetry between small and great powers by offering them theoretically equal institutional opportunities in these organizations. In sum, I suggested the framework that offers a convenient and insightful way of studying small states' foreign policy behavior and applies the model to the Armenian case only for showing you how this can be used.
Mr. Narek, we have one moment.
That will be more than enough. After bringing security into the analysis, the presented model puts heavy emphasis on the significance of great power interests and leverages concerning the small states, the implications of their competition, and the actual extent of the agency available to small states. The framework integrates causes of the object in the study that are inspired by competing schools of IR. You can use here neorealism, constructivist theories or critical theories even, which allow for comprehensive consideration of factors conditioning small states' foreign policy behavior. Thank you very much. As a, again, reminder, this was not a presentation about Armenia's foreign policy, but a methodological discussion, which I would encourage you to suggest to your students in their BA or MA thesis. I have done it. It works quite well and quite nicely. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Narek, for giving such interesting methodological framework. And our final panelist is the person that will thank everyone for coming here and me too. So, Dr. Ruben Elamiryan, Chairperson and Associate Professor at the Department of World Politics and International Relations of Russian Armenian University, Executive Officer of IPSA RC41 Geopolitics. The topic is Small States and International Uncertainty, Armenia in the Changing Regional Security Architecture. Dr. Ruben, I will respect you well, but you have 10 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Moderator, for your kind presentation. Very brief follow-up on previous presentation, as Dr. Okunev yesterday told. Next year, the next IPSA conference, on geopolitics would be on methods, so you are more welcome to apply. So as Mr. Archil told, the topic of the presentation is small states and international uncertainty. Armenia is changing. Okay, anyway, I will continue, not to lose time. So, Armenia is a changing regional security architecture. So, brief overview, what I'm going to talk about during the upcoming 10 minutes. So, it's global context and its regional implications. Armenia is a changing security environment. Then I will stop on the actors of shifting geopolitics. In the South Caucasus. Briefly, I will discuss the second darts of war, and I will discuss it as a signal for the changing world order and regional transformations in the South Caucasus. Then, very briefly, I will stop on the results of the Velvet Revolution and its implications on Armenia's foreign policy. Very brief stop on neorealist approach of black box and how it kind of correlates with Armenia's foreign policy, and a couple of conclusions. So these days, only lazy do not speak about transformation of world order and how it's changing and what are the parameters of change. So some claim that it's these days we have new world order, some claim that we're moving to polycentric or multipolar world order, non-polar world, etc. And but anyway, it's we see that these transformations are taking place, and the actors of those transformations in the South Caucasus. It's of course Russia, European Union, United States, China, Turkey, and also we can add here technological transformations, which are also changing the security environment, but in this talk I'm not going to stop on that. So very briefly on relations of Armenia with these sectors. So whenever we are speaking about relations between Russia and Armenia, and generally Russia and the South Caucasus, so it's bilateral cooperation and multilateral cooperation through the CIS, Eurasian Economic Union, and the idea of Greater Eurasia. And the relations and the analysis of the relations are based on two strategies of national security, 2015 to 2021, and foreign policy concept of the Russian Federation of 2016. As we're short of time, I will just talk about the conclusions, but if you want, I can elaborate on the conclusion in the Q&A section So Russia's policy towards the region and Armenia particularly is rather stable and sustainable, being determined by a wide range of conditions, including the necessity for strategic stability in its neighborhood, development of the EU and CSTO. So whenever we are speaking about US interests regarding Armenia, so it's based on the analysis of National Security Strategy 2017, John Bolton's visit to the South Caucasus, and of course these days we can also speak about Biden's approach. So there is this kind of internal strategy, interim strategy, sorry. Again, I can elaborate in the Q&A session, but my conclusion is that the US interests towards the region and Armenia are getting down. It was told a lot about EU, EAP, and Armenia. Thank you to my colleagues. That's why I will not stop on the details, but I will tell, and I mean, everyone knows this, that EU approach towards the region and Armenia is based on soft power components, which with geopolitics back to the region is getting more and more kind of non-stable. I mean, at the moment, for instance, recently it was announced that the EU is going to provide 2.6 billion euros to Armenia, but how it's going to impact its strategic presence in Armenia, it's kind of under question at the moment. About China and Armenia, so you see on the map, so the region is not going, I mean the Belt and Road Initiative is not going through the South Caucasus, and the relations between Armenia and China, I mean the economic cooperation is on a very low level, but anyway it's rising, and Chinese presence here is also rising, but we can't say that there is any kind of strategic cooperation. Whenever it comes to the second Artsakh War as a signal of changing regional order, I'm doing on time.
You have 4 minutes.
Great. So these days many speak that second Artsakh War has changed the geopolitical environment in the South Caucasus, but in my opinion, and again we can discuss this, the second Artsakh War became the result of that transformation which happened before. And as a result of the war, and that's to be more correct, as a result of that transformation, we see strengthening role of Russia and closer cooperation with Armenia, strengthening role of Turkey in the South Caucasus, declining US interests and uncertainty from the EU regarding its strategic future in general and regarding the region as such. And if we are talking about Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, of course there is uncertainty with the future of OSCE Minsk group. A very brief stop on Armenia's foreign policy before and after the Velvet Revolution. My assumption is that, at least on a strategic level, it is the same. For instance, if we are comparing national security strategies of 2007 and 2020, I mean, essence-wise regarding the foreign policy making, strategic vectors, etc., it's pretty much the same, essence-wise. The explanation might be neorealist approach of black box, which claims that it doesn't matter what kind of domestic situation you have, foreign policy making is based on strategic environment, Probably this is more or less in case of Armenia, but of course it's about if we are talking about rational actors in the power, and so most probably it worked in case of Armenia. And I will jump to the conclusions. Couple of conclusions. The second Arts of War has clearly demonstrated the changing reality, not from inside of Armenia, as many were thinking that it would happen after the Velvet Revolution, but externally, meaning the global and regional security landscape. The dualism of the period is that Russia recognizes the region as a sphere of its major or even exceptional interests, seeing it as a part of the post-Soviet space, while Turkey is returning to the South Caucasus through its alliance with Azerbaijan. In this regard, what has already happened is a gradual shift of the South Caucasus from being a part of the post-Soviet space toward the Middle Eastern agenda. And finally, as a consequence, the new reality demands radical steps from the Armenian political elites to formulate the national interests of Armenia, its vision, and accordingly to modernize the foreign policy strategy to provide coherent development within the new, much more dangerous and uncertain environment. Thank you.
Well, I think that we did a really great job. So we have 10 minutes for Q&A session. Yes, I see hands. Can you? 2 hands, 3. Perfect. So when you don't break deadlines, you have questions. So please, the first one was here. Please give questions and not the huge comments as usually it happens.
No, my intention is to ask a follow-up question on the excellent presentations of the speakers. What are the options for Armenia's foreign and security policy after the recent war in Artsakh? One of the options would be to become something like the Israel of the Caucasus, increase defense burden, be relatively autonomous, not rely on regional partners. Second, as suggested by Dr. Elamiryan, rely a little bit more on Russia, increase cooperation perhaps, in order to achieve security and potential economic gains. The third, bandwagoning, so essentially getting closer to rivals, getting closer to Turkey, getting closer to Azerbaijan, trying to find a negotiated solution, recognizing the result of the recent war. What is the political discourse in Armenia? Which one of these very difficult options is the one preferred? As an outsider, coming from a Western perspective, it's hard for me as an analyst to understand. Thank you.
Dr. Ruben, I would like to ask you to give a short answers because we need to start another panel in 10 minutes.
Yeah, thank you for a very interesting question. So if we are talking about political discourse in Armenia, probably all 3 options are there, and there is a discussion around all of these issues. But the thing is that, for instance, if you are speaking about Israel of the region, so the idea of Israel of the region, yes, Israel doesn't rely on its neighbors, or autonomous, but it relies on the US. And in case of Armenia, probably, especially given the current geopolitical transformations, we can say that Russia has the place of kind of US in the region, so we cannot recognize Russia as a regional power. So this is the thing. And given the current transformations, anyway, I think that Armenia should continue with its multi-vector foreign policy, but given again the situation, with more cooperation with Russia, because so we need modernization of the army, etc. And when it comes to the relations with Turkey and Azerbaijan, look, the thing is that we are receiving this kind of rhetorical signals, yes, from both Turkey and Azerbaijan. But what's happening on the ground? I mean, even after the war, yes. So there are Azerbaijani troops on the territory of Armenia. So basically speaking, they are threatening with another invasion, etc., etc. So this is the problem. So, and this makes the political and public discourse in Armenia not to be able to even discuss the issue of improving relations with, let's say, Azerbaijan.
If I may just shortly add to your points, I will go by one by one of your scenarios. So, first, Israel of Caucasus. Put simply, it's not comparable in neo-realist terms because the security environments are different. Armenia is not as resourceful as Israel, and the Armenia's main protector, Russia, is not as protective as the US is in case of Israel, so that's not comparable. Relying on Russia, it's the safest and more stable at least in the short and mid-term perspective, in the hearts and minds of the policymakers, so that's going to be probably the policy orientation that you're asking about. And the third one, bandwagoning with Turkey or Azerbaijan already in the case as the winner of the war. Bandwagoning works if there is willingness on the side of the great power. There, as Dr. Elamiryan pointed out, there doesn't seem much of the willingness. That discourse has been in place in Armenia after the independence, but it didn't work internally and was a result of, among other reasons, was a result of palace coup that brought down the first president. So there was some kind of close narratives to what bandwagoning, or at least normalizing relations with the neighbors. That will be the short answer.
Thank you. So please, there is a question here. We have 5 minutes left and then they must pass to another panel, so please be short.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the interesting presentations. I would have two very short questions. The first one is about the two-filter framework. Since my very narrow field of interest is the Persian Gulf, I started to apply your framework on the Persian Gulf region, and my assessment would be that if we apply this framework to the South Caucasus region and the Persian Gulf region, the answers...
Sorry, what region?
The Persian Gulf region.
Persian Gulf.
Yeah, and I would assume that the answers based on this model would be the same for the small states of the two regions, but with different players in Iran, with Saudi Arabia and Iraq to some extent. And my question would be, how can you explain the very different strategies which we can see on the part of the small states of the two regions? So shouldn't, for example, identity play a role in these foreign policy decisions? And my second question is to Professor Gevorgyan, if she's still here on Zoom. What advice would you give to the EU to be a more constructive player in the region? Thank you.
Please give short answers because we have one more question left and there is no time.
There's another question.
As I've already had my contribution, I would let Dr. Gevorgyan to answer first if she wants or is ready. And then if there is time left, I will also add.
To give just a short answer, I would advise you to take into consideration the security issues in the region, and especially the hard security issues of the countries, of the partners, and to maybe add to soft security mechanism they're using in the region, some security guarantees for the partners, so that especially small countries who are in a situation like Armenia, having security issues, could be more active in their, could not be constrained with their security limitations when it comes to partnership with the EU. Because in the case of Armenia, despite the huge interest and the willingness of Armenia to have this partnership, deep partnership with the EU, we can see that all the security issues, they're just eliminating all the efforts the EU is doing in the region and vis-a-vis Armenia. That's.
Mr. Narek.
Yes. Thank you for the question. I'm not an expert on Persian Gulf, so I would not be able to give you an empiric answer to that. But first of all, the framework that is proposed is methodological, and obviously, when applied to different cases, it will give different results, because otherwise it would have not been scientific at all if it produced every time the same results. You are very right pointing out that history, that identity plays a role in there, and the fourth variable by Knudsen is the historical record of relations between the small state and the nearest great power, where I suggested to bring in constructivism and read and to see how the society, how the governing elites read the history, how they see that, how they perceive the role of the great power, whether they see it imperialistic or whether they see it. Simple case, you compare Armenia and Georgia experience with Russia. One considers it as a historical narrative, considers Russia as a savior, protector from other regional powers. The other one considers it as an occupant. So when you bring that in, that adds a lot of nuance, and I agree with you.
Thank you. We have two questions.
Do you have time?
Yes, we have time, but please, short questions, short answers. And we have one online question from Michael Strauss, so I would like to end here. So, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the great presentations. I have a very quick question, maybe to Dr. Elamiryan, but if the others would also like to chime in, concerning the nature of Russian-Turkish relations today, and what the impact that has for the region, for the Caucasus, especially to Armenia, because I feel like Moscow-Ankara relations, in a way, from an historical perspective, they are at a high compared to other times in the past, right? They are not so bad anymore. So, there was more tension before, but at the same time you have Ankara aligning itself with Azerbaijan, okay, Russia aligning itself with Armenia. What does it mean now that Russia and Turkey do not have such a bad relationship anymore? What does this mean to the region now in terms of maybe a lock-in for Armenia in this regional state of affairs? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Actually, it's a very complex question. And probably on one hand, it's good that Russia and Turkey are kind of managing their relations to avoid a conflict. Because otherwise, we don't know what would have happened with the South Caucasus. Probably we would have another Syria. If there is a direct clash between the sides. But also,
Mr. Narek, you cannot.
No, but on the other hand, but I think this is the most important part at the moment. At the same time, probably it comes also to the countries of the region. How you manage your relations with those powers, and how you formulate your national interests, and how you can be, let's say, attractive for your allies and for your partners, to make them to push also your interests. Probably this is my answer.
Mr. Narek, would you like to add something? Okay, so we have the last question. We already exceeded our time from Michael Strauss. Please, your reaction or short question.
Okay, thank you very much, and I will keep it short. Thank you for these presentations. This question cuts across several of them, and that is about the role of small states in the context of rivalry between global powers. The case of the Seychelles in the Indian Ocean suggests that the role of small states in this regard as a crossroad can transcend rivalries, in the sense that it was first at the crossroads between the rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union, and now it's at the crossroads between the rivalry between China and India. As they seek to develop, as they seek to influence the small state, in this case the Seychelles, they give them things, they increase their ability to develop themselves as states and also their security. And I'm wondering whether this is something that small states can capitalize on by developing themselves as a pivot point as part of their strategic development in order to capitalize on what they can get from the rivals. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Mr. Narek, Mr. Ruben, Dr. Ruben, Norayr, is there something that you would like to answer?
If Dr. Gevorgyan
Can you take another microphone, please?
If Dr. Gevorgyan has anything to...
Yes, Dr. Georgian, if you have anything also to add, please shortly, because people are waiting us for online session.
No, I'm not taking your time, please.
All right, then I guess it remains to me. The easy answer is that, the short answer to your question is that there is opportunity for small states when they find themselves in the rivalry between greater powers, but more often it contains challenges, risks, security concerns rather than opportunities, because as I mentioned again, I will reference the variables of Olaf Knudsen. I think it was the second one which contemplates on the degree of tension between the great powers and that are rivals in the sphere of interest of the small state. And the more tense are the relations between those great powers, the worse it will be for the small state, which has to maneuver between them. And this is the case if we make a reference to theory. This will be the case only when the small state is not a colony, in brackets, is not a colony of one of those states, or does not enjoy the full protection of any of them. So if it is very happy with everything that one of those great powers gives it, it doesn't need to maneuver and use the rivalry of those great powers. In case of Israel, right? I'm not saying that Israel is a colony, not in any case, but Israel enjoys enough support from the United States not to look in any other way of any other great powers to find maneuverability. But in case of other states that receive security from one great power but also need development resources from others, they need to apply to this maneuverability. And in this case, at least in theoretical scenario, this environment contains more risks, more challenges than opportunities for the small state.
So, ladies and gentlemen, we have already exceeded our time. The next panel, the following panel, the sixth one, will be online, called Geopolitics Most Weight in the 21st Century, and moderator will be Lily Ong from GIMO, Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia. I'm not sure, should we pass it directly or have a few minutes break?
No, let's go direct.
Okay, so Lily Ong, the floor is yours, and thanks everyone for attending our panel. The panel is closed now. Goodbye.